Hello, welcome to the channel Y Stories. Enjoy watching.
Victor Garcia was fascinated watching the leaves, which the wind first plucked from the trees and then merrily chased along the road. Most of the leaves were yellow, giving the impression that little specks of sunshine were running along the park pathways. Victor remembered vividly how last autumn the wind played exactly the same with the fallen leaves when he started going to school. That September day was etched in the boy's memory in the finest detail. Victor was a little, just a tiny bit, afraid of the unknown, but his grandmother, Susanna, laughed at his fears. "Silly boy, don't be afraid, nobody will hurt you at school. The teachers there are just as kind as the caretakers in kindergarten. You'll like it. You'll make friends with other kids." Grandma was right. On the very first day, a boy approached Victor and said very seriously, "My name is Alberto Jimenez. If you want, I can be your friend." Victor agreed immediately. "Let's be friends." The boys wanted to solidify their alliance right away and wanted to sit at the same desk, but the teacher said, "Children, I'll assign your seats myself. We have strict rules at school. During lessons, you should study, and you can socialize with friends during breaks and after classes." Rufina Gill, that was the teacher's name, quickly restored order in the classroom. She seated the children in pairs, a boy and a girl. Adelaida Arias turned out to be Victor Garcia's neighbor. She was a girl with huge eyes and two thick braids. Adelaida almost immediately offered to be friends. "Let's be friends." Victor didn't yet know the rules of school life very well. He thought no one couldn't be friends with two people at the same time, so he whispered back, "I'm already friends with Alberto. If you had asked me earlier, I would have agreed." Adelaida dramatically rolled her huge eyes and sighed sadly. "Too bad, but if you ever quarrel with Alberto, I'll be the first." Victor was very surprised that you had to queue up to be friends, but just in case, he promised. "Okay. I'll let you know right away." But Adelaida wasn't destined to see Victor's and Alberto's friendship come to an end. The boys became so close in just a few days. It seemed to them that they had always known each other. Alberto lived in the neighboring house and once invited Victor to visit. "Come on, I'll show you the telescope. My dad gave it to me." Victor had never seen a real telescope before and was amazed by its capabilities. Alberto's dad told them about the stars and other worlds, and the boys were afraid to even breathe loudly so as not to miss anything important. Victor returned home, impressed. Grandma Susanna asked with a smile, "How was it? Did you enjoy it?" The boy just shook his head because he couldn't say anything. That night, Victor dreamt of stars and a spaceship on which he was the captain. At school, he told his friend about his fantastic dream, and Alberto just smiled. "I used to have dreams like that too at first, but then I got used to the stars. My dad and I observed them every evening. If you enjoyed it, come over again." But Victor couldn't take up his little friend's offer because, unexpectedly, Grandma Susanna fell ill. The neighbor had been taking care of the boy for a while, and he was eagerly awaiting Grandma's discharge from the hospital. Victor remembered very well the day when the neighbor returned from the hospital in tears. She hugged him and whispered loudly, "Victor, your grandma passed away this morning. What is going to happen now? You have no one left." Every neighbor came to Grandma Susanna's funeral. Victor had his first experience attending such a sad event. He looked at his grandmother lying in the coffin and waited for her to wake up. Of course, he knew that all people die when their time comes, usually in old age, but Grandma Susanna didn't look like an old lady. Even after the funeral, when he and the neighbor returned from the cemetery, the boy believed that the door would open soon, Grandma would come in, and she would kindly say, "Victor, let's go home. Viola must be tired of you by now." But Grandma never came back. Instead, an unfamiliar woman and man came to the neighbor's house. And Viola started crying again. "Are you taking him away so soon? Let him stay with me for a little while." The child hasn't yet come to terms with the fact that he no longer has a grandma. The man sternly told the neighbor, "You are a complete stranger to the boy, and we have no right to leave him here." This man was speaking exactly like Alberto's robot that his father had given him. Victor understood that something very unpleasant was happening, but he couldn't change anything. At that moment, all the boy wanted was to become invisible so that he could quietly escape from these unpleasant people. The strangers were talking loudly to Viola, and she was just crying. Then the neighbor pleaded, "Let me at least gather his things." The man said sternly to the neighbor mechanically, "We'll provide everything he needs there. Although you can pack some personal items and clothes if you'd like." The neighbor hurriedly rushed into Grandma's apartment. Victor also started to follow her because he wanted to say goodbye to the house where his happiest days and childhood memories remained forever. But the stern man didn't allow it. "Boy, stay here, we're responsible for you now." Victor felt so hurt that he burst into tears. The guests tried to calm him down. The woman, who hadn't said a word before, made an effort to comfort him. "Dear, don't cry. There's good food at the orphanage, there are plenty of toys, and you won't be bored." The man's voice softened too, and he no longer sounded like a robot. "Kid, be brave. You have to be strong and endure. There are boys just like you in the orphanage, plenty of girls too, and you'll definitely make friends." Through tears, Victor shouted, "I already have a friend, Alberto. I don't want any other friends." Viola returned with his school backpack and handed it to the visitors. "Here, I've packed it. Can I visit Victor?" The guests were in a hurry to take the boy with them, and the man replied shortly, "Of course, you can, but only after the quarantine is over." As strange people led him to the car, Victor felt such a dreadful fear that his heart even skipped a beat. But he became even more scared when the stern man opened the car's rear door and ordered, "Come on, kid, get in." Victor jerked his hand, which the stranger was holding, with all his strength. The man clearly didn't expect such behavior from him and shouted, "Boy, don't provoke me. Another stunt like this, and I'll give you a good spanking like a father would. Although you probably don't know what a father can do." The silent woman turned to her companion. "Fernando, drop your tough guy act. This kid doesn't even turn 7, and he's already endured so much sorrow. First, his mother died because of a drunk driver, and now his grandmother. Don't pressure the child. Imagine it's your own son." The man grumbled disapprovingly. "I have a daughter, and I really don't understand all this sentimentality. Children need toughening up from an early age to get used to the fact that life isn't easy." The woman murmured something quietly in response, but Victor didn't catch her words. He didn't like this robot-like uncle or what he was saying at all. But he understood the meaning of his words on the very first day of his stay in the orphanage. For several weeks, Victor stayed at the reception center before being transferred to the orphanage located in their small town. The orphanage's director, Marina Serrano, personally explained everything to the newcomer. "Victor, don't be afraid of anyone. If someone dares to bully you, come to me right away." He wasn't yet 7 years old, but he knew perfectly well that tattling wasn't good, so he never took the director's advice. Victor endured the teasing of the older children stoically and didn't cry when they once decided to scare him. Although the little boy's courage was appreciated, everyone kept their distance from him for a long time, and only right before New Year, Cassiano Lozano, who was already in the 3rd grade, offered, "Victor, if anyone starts bullying you, just tell me." Victor widened his eyes in surprise. "Are you going to be friends with me?" Cassiano smiled awkwardly. "Kind of. You remind me a lot of my little brother." Victor was surprised again. "You have a brother? Is he also in the orphanage?" Cassiano grimaced. "You ask too many questions. We don't like overly curious people here, so it's better to keep quiet." Victor didn't bother him with questions anymore. A little later, Cassiano himself told him that he came from a large family. Mom and Dad used to drink a lot, Then Dad passed away, and Mom was left alone. I still have a brother and 3 little sisters. I'm the older brother. I don't even know where they are now. When I grow up, I'll run away from here and look for them." Forgetting the warning, Victor asked, "Does your mom come to visit you?" Cassiano waved his hand. "She's too busy." "You know what, kid?" Victor shook his head, and Cassiano laughed loudly again. "Of course, how would you know if I haven't said anything yet? Kid, being a full orphan is much better than having parents like mine." "Why is it better, Cassiano?" "Well, the full orphans can get adopted." Cassiano patted Victor on the shoulder. "Maybe someone will like you and take you into their family. You have a nice face, and you're such a neat kid." After that conversation, Victor struggled to find peace of mind for a long time. The boy couldn't comprehend how one could live with strangers and call them mom and dad. Victor slowly adjusted to life in the orphanage, and on this difficult journey, his new friend greatly helped him. To remember and learn everything, the little boy followed Cassiano everywhere, like a shadow. Cassiano was pleased with his companion's loyalty and repeated it endlessly. "Look, Victor, and learn." Even the older kids respected Cassiano, which elevated him even more in Victor's eyes. Only the teachers and caregivers were displeased with Cassiano. They considered him a troublemaker and a nuisance. Indeed, Cassiano didn't burden himself with studies. He was often scolded during lessons. But Cassiano was always the first to learn important news and share it with the other children. Once he announced, "Tomorrow, the sponsors are coming. The supervisor said we should tidy up for another show." Victor asked his friend, "Who are they? I mean, the ones you mentioned?" The little boy didn't remember the unfamiliar word at first. Cassiano chuckled. "You don't know who the sponsors are?" Victor nodded and guessed the first thing that came to his mind. "Are they doctors?" Cassiano hit him slightly on the forehead. "Kid, you're totally clueless. Sponsors are rich people. They come with gifts and say lots of nice words, and then..." Cassiano fell silent, and Victor couldn't wait to know what happened next. He pestered his friend. "Why are you silent? Tell me, what happens next? Do these sponsors take back their gifts?" Cassiano had been laughing for a long time, and Victor didn't understand why it was so funny. When Cassiano calmed down, he looked at his little friend with pity. "You're really silly, Victor. You don't understand anything about life. Don't you know it's improper to take back something that's already been given? Sponsors bring lots of stuff and leave it all here. Some of them come here often, and naive kids like you hope that some rich man will take them away forever. Even the caregivers hope for that and throw a lavish reception with a concert for the guests. So, if Marina Serrano asks you to recite a poem or sing, don't refuse. Maybe someone will like you and take you away." Victor got scared. "I don't want them to take me away. I'd rather stay here. I have you here." Cassiano didn't say anything and playfully nudged Victor once more, but Victor didn't take offense at him because this common gesture indicated that Cassiano also considered him his friend. For the little boy, it meant a lot. On the day the guests arrived at the orphanage, there was a bustle in the early morning. The children, along with the caregivers and teachers, decorated the hall and hurriedly rehearsed the best performances. Victor stayed away from this hustle and bustle. He was sitting on a chair, observing. Passing by, Eleonora Vega asked, "Victor, why are you loafing around? Come with me." Victor reluctantly left his comfortable spot and followed Cassiano's classmate. Eleonora immediately started giving orders. "I'll hang the balloons, and you hand them to me." Victor thought to himself that this annoying girl, who always reported everyone to the director, could handle it herself, but he didn't express his dissatisfaction out loud. With Victor's help, Eleonora finished the job in a few minutes. There was only one balloon left when someone from the kids yelled, "They're coming." Everyone rushed around again, and Victor watched this disorderly movement with surprise. Eleonora jumped off her chair and pushed him hard to the side. Idiot, go hide somewhere. But the boy didn't understand why he should have hidden. Eleonora pushed him forward towards the stairs. I'm telling you to hide and don't interfere. You're not grown up enough to meet the sponsors. She overdid it when pushing, and Victor fell to his knees. At that moment, the entrance door swung open, and two men entered the hall. They were followed by a small procession of local officials. Everything happened so quickly that Victor hadn't even managed to get up after Eleonora's shove. The guest stopped, and the man leading the procession extended his hand to him. Kiddo, are you hurt? Let me help you up. Victor stood up with the stranger's assistance. He felt something warm trickling down his right leg, but he didn't show that he felt pain. With a lively voice, he reassured the stranger. No, sir, I'm not hurt at all, just a little bit. The man chuckled kindly and squatted down in front of him. So, is it painful or not? Looking into the man's eyes, the boy smiled. It honestly doesn't hurt. That's great. Then let's get acquainted. The man extended his hand to the boy. My name is Valerio Cano. The little boy responded in a grown-up manner. I'm Victor Garcia. The guests applauded together. One of the escorts remarked, Victor, this boy looks so much like you. The businessman agreed. You're right, there's something about him that resembles the Cano lineage. Victor felt very pleased to be the center of attention, but it was even more pleasant to feel this man was close to him. When Marina invited the guests to enter the auditorium, the boy also followed his new acquaintance. However, the director looked at him very expressively and whispered, Victor, stay here, you're not participating in the concert. The good mood vanished immediately, and Victor even felt like crying. But he held back because Eleonora came running up. Victor, were you trying to show off but got rejected? Victor didn't respond and ran off to the dormitory. From the window, he was watching the guests leave. His adult friend didn't immediately get into the car. He stood there for a moment, looking up at the windows on the second floor. Victor didn't hide and waved to the man. He was sure that Valerio Cano noticed him because he waved back. Victor decided not to tell Cassiano anything for now, but it turned out that just 2 days later, Valerio Cano came to the orphanage again, but this time he was alone. Victor only found out about his arrival after the duty caregiver said, Victor, hurry to the director's office, someone is waiting for you there. Victor immediately guessed that Valerio Cano was waiting for him. His heart leaped for joy because he liked this man from the first sight, but Marina Serrano didn't share his enthusiasm, as was evident by her stern expression. When Victor rushed into the office, she said to the guest, Valerio, remember what I told you, it's easy to hurt children, and those wounds stay in their hearts for life. Valerio Cano reassured the mentor. Don't worry, my intentions are serious. Life hasn't been kind to me either, and I know well about wounds. When Marina reluctantly left her office, the businessman extended his hand to the boy. Hello, Victor. The boy exclaimed mischievously. Hello. Valerian Cano was surprised. Wow, I didn't expect you to be so cheeky. Tell me, what else can you do, and what do you dream about? In the presence of this man, Victor didn't feel ashamed or inhibited. He honestly talked about himself and his friends. Of course, the story of the 7-year-old boy was short, as there weren't many events in his little life. While listening, Valerian was looking down. When the boy fell silent, he said softly, You've had some bad luck. Tell me, do you not remember your mom at all? The boy shook his closely cropped head. I was little when she passed away. My grandma showed me pictures. She was always crying, saying she had such a life because of her sins. Valerio asked another very important question for him. What was your grandma's name? The boy readily answered, Susana Garcia. And my mom was named Elisa. The boy hesitated and shrugged his sharp little shoulders. I don't know anything else. Grandma promised to tell me everything when I grew up, but she died. Valerio had already familiarized himself with his little friend's personal history, and there was something in this boy's story that made his heart beat faster. But he wasn't accustomed to making hasty moves, and after that first private meeting, he said, "Victor, I have to go now, but I'll definitely visit you again. You don't mind, do you?" The boy widened his surprised eyes. "Please come. I like being with you, you're very kind." No sooner had Valerio left than Cassiano came running. "Victor, you're incredibly lucky." "Why?" "You're so naive, don't you understand that this man isn't coming just to talk to you?" Victor froze. "Then why is he coming?" "He's checking you out to adopt you." Cassiano knew everything about life, and Victor trusted him. Valerio visited Victor every week, and the boy had already gotten used to his visits. Once, with Marina's permission, Valerio took the child to the zoo, which was located in the city. Next time, he gifted the boy a tablet and promised, "Victor, there are so many interesting things ahead of us. I'll tell you a secret, I have vacation in September, and we'll go on a trip with the whole family." Before, Valerio hadn't told him anything about his family, so the boy was surprised and, at the same time, disappointed. "Do you have children?" Valerio understood what was going on in the child's mind. He drew him closer and whispered, "Don't worry about it, though I'm a little worried myself. I hope everything will work out for us. I have a son, Hugo, he's 13 already. I hope you two will become friends. And I'll manage to persuade my wife. She's very kind." That was their last meeting. Valerio never appeared at the orphanage again. Victor spent days sitting by the window, waiting for his benefactor. Cassiano did his best to support his friend. "Victor, don't worry so much. Valerio is a serious man. Such people don't just throw words to the wind. If they promise something, they always follow through. Maybe Valerio has some troubles or he's fallen ill." The latter turned out to be true. After long days of painful uncertainty, Marina took pity on the boy and told him the truth. "Victor, Valerio Cano fell ill and is currently in the hospital." The boy burst into tears. "But he'll get better, won't he?" The director hugged the child maternally. "He'll definitely get better." From the quivering voice of the caregiver, Victor guessed that she was also crying. The boy had gone to church several times with his grandmother Susanna and had seen people praying. He didn't know what to say, so in his own words, he asked God to help Valerio get better soon. But God didn't hear him. Yesterday, Cassiano brought a newspaper that the night caretaker had left on the table. Victor read it. On the last page, there was a small note, and the boy learned that Valerio had died. Tears streamed down his cheeks, and it was hard to breathe, but the boy whispered, "It's not true, I don't believe it." Cassiano didn't leave his little friend's side all day. From his own experience, Cassiano knew how important it was to have someone by your side in difficult times. Cassiano also learned another truth: any pain fades with time. The terrible news struck Victor hard. He didn't sleep all night, remembering how Valerio promised him an amazing trip. He felt like crying in despair, but he couldn't. The next morning, right after breakfast, the boy went to a small square where he liked to spend time. He didn't feel like playing with the other children, not even meeting his only friend, Cassiano. It wasn't the first serious trial in Victor's life. From past experience, the boy knew he needed a little time alone. The fallen leaves, chased by the wind, frolicked around Victor's feet, but their play didn't seem cheerful to the boy. He sadly thought, last autumn, Grandma died, and now Valerio. Why do kind people die so early? Victor didn't have time to come up with an answer to this question because Cassiano called him from the playground. "Victor, come here, I need to tell you something." Victor wasn't in the mood to be entertained, so he waved his hand. "I'd rather just sit here, I'm not in the mood to play." It wasn't long before Cassiano ran up to him himself. He sat down next to him and whispered fervently in Victor's ear. "Listen, Victor, I found out something. I think you'll be interested in knowing." Victor asked indifferently, What is it? Cassiano leaned in even closer. Valerio will be buried tomorrow, and I think it would be all right for you to say goodbye to him. I know there's a custom of saying farewell to loved ones when they die, and Valerio was like. Cassiano couldn't find the right word, and Victor whispered very softly. Cassiano, he was like a dad to me and wanted to take me with him. I never had a real dad in my life, and I always dreamed that he would show up. When Valerio and I went to the zoo, I already understood that he wanted to take me with him. He was so kind and strong. Victor sniffled. Cassiano sympathetically said, I understand. I've had my fair share of disappointments too. Just when things seem to be going well, they fall apart. But you should stay strong. Imagine what Valerio would say to you right now. The boy smiled through his tears. Cassiano, he would tell me that a man should take the blow. Cassiano exclaimed happily. See, every time you find it hard, just remember him. The boys fell silent. Cassiano, sighing, thought about his own failed life while Victor was watching the wind play with the leaves. The 7-year-old boy thought that leaves were somehow like people, and it was very sad that the wind was often stronger than them. After a long pause, Cassiano confidently said, Victor, you absolutely need to be there. The thread of the previous conversation was already lost, and Victor asked with surprise, Where? Cassiano frowned, dissatisfied. Victor, you're starting to disappoint me. Your father, so to speak, died, and the funeral will be tomorrow. Got it? Cassiano waited for Victor to nod in understanding before continuing. So you need to be at the cemetery. Victor paused for a moment, pondering his friend's words, and then said, I know where it is. When Grandma died, I was there. The next day after the funeral, Viola and I went there. But nobody will let me go, Cassiano. Cassiano shook his head. Victor, you're still like a child, you have a lot to learn. Why ask for permission when you can sneak out for a short while? Victor even began to stutter in surprise. How? Cassiano chuckled. It's very simple. Over there, Cassiano nodded towards the high fence separating the orphanage from the residential area of the town. There's a gap. Older kids often use it to sneak into town for a party or just to hang out with local guys. Victor skeptically asked, Can I do that? What if I get caught? If you do everything right, no one will even notice. You'll go to the cemetery, find out where Valerio's grave is, and then calmly return by lunchtime. Valerio's funeral is tomorrow, it's Saturday. Since there were no school activities at the orphanage on weekends, Cassiano's plan seemed quite realistic. Cassiano showed his friend the secret place that led to freedom. According to Cassiano's plan, Victor was supposed to return immediately. Cassiano advised, Don't take anything with you. You'll attract the caregiver's attention. And don't go anywhere else, remember, you need to be back for lunch. Victor promised earnestly. Cassiano, I'll definitely come back. There were certain risks associated with the upcoming event, which excited the boy's imagination. He envisioned various scenarios of how he would run away and then return to the orphanage. All that was left was to wait for the morning to put Cassiano's plan into action. Victor hardly slept again that night. He had a severe headache, but he bravely endured it because he couldn't give up on what he had planned. Anxious thoughts prevented the boy from focusing, and a lack of sleep affected his appetite badly. The night caregiver noticed this and said disapprovingly, Victor, what are you poking at on your plate? Hurry up and finish your meal. I'm not going to stand here watching over you. Victor forced himself to eat the porridge. He was very afraid that the caregiver would suspect something or suddenly read his thoughts, but everything went well, and after the meal, the children engaged in their favorite pastimes. The girls organized a beauty contest right in the square and pretended to be models. Most likely, they were trying to attract the attention of the boys, but they viewed the girls' antics with deep disdain. They preferred strictly masculine activities like football or push-ups for competition. Victor leisurely walked around the square and casually headed towards the secret gap. Following Cassiano's advice, he checked several times to see if anyone was spying on him, and only after making sure that everything was fine did he slip into the small opening. But the carefully planned plan almost collapsed in the first few minutes of the long-awaited freedom. Victor had not gone far from the orphanage when he met an elderly woman. The old lady carefully examined him and asked gently, "Boy, what are you doing here? I haven't seen you around here before." Victor was at a loss and began to lie aimlessly. "I came to visit my grandma Laura, and she told me to go to the store and buy bread." The old lady persisted. "Then you're going in the wrong direction. The store is over there." The boy had to change his route involuntarily, and he ran to the store. After getting some distance, he looked back and saw the unfamiliar woman following him. A treacherous thought flashed through his mind: I have to go back, or this lady won't leave me alone. But luckily for Victor, a bus pulled up at the stop right in front of the store. The boy almost screamed with joy because he saw the familiar number 11 on the bus. He remembered that he and Viola had taken this bus to the cemetery a year ago. Victor managed to jump onto the rear platform of the vehicle, and the door closed behind him immediately. He pressed against the window and saw the persistent woman watching the departing bus. He really wanted to stick his tongue out at her, but he held back because his prank could attract unwanted attention. All the way to the cemetery, Victor hid behind the backs of adult passengers, and the journey went smoothly. He had to find a reliable hiding place and wait for the funeral procession of his benefactor. This task was not so simple because the cemetery was in an open area, almost devoid of vegetation, with only a bush visible at the entrance. Without much thought, the boy dove into it and waited. Time dragged on monotonously, and Victor's legs became stiff from being in one position for so long. People came to the cemetery to visit the graves of their loved ones and then left, but Victor kept waiting. Finally, from his hiding spot, he saw several cars pulling up to the cemetery, followed by a funeral bus. Many people disembarked from there. Victor was already relieved that he could leave his hiding place when he unexpectedly noticed Marina Serrano among the attendees. Fear of being discovered chilled him to the core, and his chin trembled. "If the director notices me, I'm done for." During his several months in the orphanage, Victor picked up some street slang from the older kids. Although he didn't quite understand the meaning of many expressions, he enjoyed using them. He dove back into the bushes, thinking, I got myself into a mess. What do I do now? At this critical moment, Victor remembered Cassiano and his confident "Don't drift, buddy." He mentally thanked his friend for supporting him, even from a distance. As the boy pondered the situation, he heard the sounds of a funeral march in the distance. Soon, the music faded, replaced by the voices of people and women's crying. Victor carefully pushed aside the branches of the bush that concealed him and saw a crowd of people heading deeper into the cemetery. Two men at the front of the procession carried a large portrait of Valerio Cano, followed by several men carrying the coffin with the deceased's body. Nausea gripped the boy's throat tightly, and he started crying silently. Only now did Victor truly realize the depth of his personal loss. Forgetting to be cautious, the boy left his hiding place and joined the procession. He was hiding behind the backs of unfamiliar people, like he did on the bus. Many of those present felt it was their duty to say kind words about the deceased. Marina was among the speakers. "It's a big loss for all of us. Valerio was an amazing person with a big and very kind heart. He was a frequent visitor to our orphanage and did a lot of good for the children." Marina was speaking while Victor was crying, remaining unnoticed. Happy moments from his short life flashed through the little boy's mind again, and he suddenly realized that nothing good would ever happen to him again. "Grandma is gone, Valerio too. No one needs me anymore." The funeral ceremony was coming to an end, and people began to disperse gradually. Victor realized that it was time to return to the orphanage, but his rebellious ego resisted. The boy retreated into the bushes again and began to mentally work out a new plan. "I won't go back to the orphanage for anything. I'll go to the neighbor, Viola. She's kind and will hide me." With these thoughts in mind, the boy, trying to remain unnoticed, slipped behind the fence. Confidence gave him strength as he was running down the street to the bus stop. Victor hoped that he would be able to ride the bus for free again, but the boy was still unfamiliar with the laws of life and did not know that fortune doesn't smile twice in the same place. Margarita Cano was struck by the death of her husband, as Valerio had never complained about his health and, at 45, could easily meet the standards for 30-year-old men. Valerio was not excessively modest and often boasted in front of his son. "Hugo, take an example from your father. It's beneficial if you intend to achieve something in your life." Valerio himself had achieved quite a lot. In the business world, he was considered a successful businessman, and his family life was prosperous. From an early age, Hugo tried to be like his father, but unexpectedly declared last year, "Dad, I don't want to go into business. I feel it's not for me." Valerio didn't force his son, but he tried to understand his life position. Hugo didn't make his father plead for long, and he immediately opened up. "Dad, I dream of becoming a soldier." Margarita remembered how her husband remained silent for a long time and then sighed. "Well, it's a worthy occupation for a real man, and your mom and I won't oppose your decision." At that moment, everything turned upside down in the woman's soul, and she wanted to express a firm protest, but her husband's gaze stopped her. She remained silent, which she later regretted, and in the fall, with his father's assistance, Hugo enrolled in a military school. For a long time, Margarita couldn't get used to her son's empty room. She felt very lonely in the large apartment. Her husband was attentive and noticed her mood, so he decided to have a frank conversation with her. "Margarita, you're a smart woman and should understand that there comes a time when a boy turns into a man. And parents have no right to keep their children by their side. After all, fanatical love is destructive. It deprives a person of independence. You wouldn't want our son to turn into an amorphous creature." Of course, Margarita didn't wish such a fate for her only son, but she couldn't imagine how to fill the void that formed after his departure. One day, her husband suggested, "Margarita, you could get involved in charity work. Such activity will occupy the emptiness and bring you a lot of satisfaction. I know it from experience." The woman immediately waved off the suggestion. "One benefactor is enough for our family. Of course, I'm not against helping those in need, but I can't visit orphanages or homes for the elderly. My nerves can't handle it. I feel sorry for everyone. I want to warm and feed everyone, but I understand that it's impossible." Margarita remembered that her husband looked at her strangely then and said thoughtfully, "Why everyone? Even saving one soul means a lot." She found this conversation unpleasant and didn't ask her husband whose soul he was suggesting saving. This conversation took place at the end of the summer after they took Hugo to his place of study. In the fall, they planned to go on vacation together, and Valerio even promised her some surprise, but an unexpected disaster didn't let these plans happen. On that fateful day, a storm broke out, and the gusty wind tore roofs off houses and uprooted trees. Valerio was about to leave for some errands, but as he exited the office, a sign collapsed on him. The structure had considerable weight, but it didn't cause significant injuries to the man, just a few bruises on his back and shoulders and a minor concussion. Valerio even joked about it over dinner. "Margarita, can you imagine? Today, my own company almost did me in." The woman was surprised. "How could that happen?" Valerio laughed. "Life is full of inexplicable accidents. Today's incident falls into that category. The wind blew the sign of our company onto me. But, thank God, everything turned out fine. It hit me hard on the head, of course, but I'm resilient." Margarita examined her husband's bruises and also thought he got off lightly, but during the night, his condition deteriorated sharply. He complained of unbearable headaches, and they had to call an ambulance. Valerio was immediately taken for x-rays, and the attending doctor announced, "Your husband is in a very bad condition. He has the brain swelling." The medic didn't say anything more coherent, and Valerio was immediately admitted to the intensive care unit. It was only the next day that the woman learned from a nurse that her husband had been hooked up to various machines because his body was failing to cope. Margarita, who had some understanding of medicine, immediately went to the chief physician. She pleaded for her husband to be urgently transferred to the city hospital, but the doctor sadly shook his head. "We can't transport him now, it's too serious. We'll wait for the crisis to pass." But there was no improvement, and on the fourth day, Valerio passed away without regaining consciousness. Margarita was in such a state in the following days that she only remembered fragments of events. Several times she lost consciousness, and her close friend had to revive her. Only on the day of the funeral did her head clear slightly. The friend was very worried about her. "Margarita, maybe I should give you a couple of tranquilizer pills so you don't collapse at the cemetery." But the woman categorically refused medication. "No need, I'll try to hold myself together. I want to be of sound mind, but just in case, keep your remedy handy." During the farewell ceremony, there were many moments when Margarita was on the verge of fainting. Perhaps her friend would have had to resort to emergency aid if not for a little boy. The widow didn't notice him at first. Initially, she thought he had come with someone familiar to Valerio. The thought crossed her, why drag a child to the cemetery? But then she realized that this boy was on his own. He tried to hide behind the adults, which was quite noticeable. From a distance, the woman couldn't see the boy well, but she easily determined that he was no older than 8. She noticed how the boy slipped into the bushes that stretched like a wall at the entrance. A pang of pain pierced her heart, and a foolish thought raced through her mind. This child is somehow connected to Valerio, and I must find out. When all the participants in the ceremony began to leave, Margarita's friend offered, "Let me give you and Hugo a ride home." Margarita quickly replied, "Let Hugo go with you, and I'll stay here for now." Her son didn't like this decision. "Mom, I can't leave you here alone." But Ariel understood the widow's desire and dragged the boy along. "Hugo, let Mom say goodbye to your father, it's necessary." These brief negotiations took only a few minutes, but the boy, who incognito attended the funeral ceremony, had enough time to sneak out. Margarita tried to see him, then peered into the bushes, but the kid was already gone. The woman rushed outside the fence and, in the distance, saw a familiar silhouette. At first, she wanted to call out to the boy, but she realized that it would only frighten him. Margarita was briskly walking after the boy, and the distance between them was shrinking with each passing minute. When the bus approached the stop, the boy jumped onto it. Margarita followed him into the cabin and sat closer to the door. The unfamiliar boy was within arm's reach of her, and she could already make out his features. But after the first few seconds of looking at him, Margarita felt nauseous because this unfamiliar boy looked exactly like her late husband. Of course, the similarity between the grown man and the child was not obvious, but there were childhood photos of Valerio at home. That's why the resemblance was so clearly expressed. Various scenarios ran through the widow's mind, but she concluded that most likely her husband had an affair, and this boy was his illegitimate son. A wave of bitterness engulfed Margarita entirely. Perhaps at that moment her expression changed significantly because the boy looked at her fearfully, but she found the strength to smile at him. When the boy got off at the stop, Margarita also left the bus. Now she was burning with the desire to find out everything to the end. Victor ran from the stop to a familiar house. He couldn't wait to get into Viola's apartment because salvation awaited him there. The boy didn't want to think about how the orphanage had raised the alarm after his disappearance, and now everyone was looking for him. He only felt sorry for Cassiano, whom he had greatly disappointed. "Okay, I'll explain everything to him later, and he won't be mad at me," Victor thought as he was heading to his entrance. He was sure that Cassiano would do the same if he were in his shoes. The boy was exhausted from the day's adventures and the excess of emotions. He was walking towards his final destination, no longer looking around, so he didn't notice the woman following him, who had seemed very strange to him on the bus. Victor was already near the entrance doors when someone familiar called him out. "Victor?" The boy turned sharply and saw his first school friend. He mumbled in confusion. Alberto? Alberto was surprised. Yeah, it's me. But what about you? Our classmates said you were in the orphanage. Did you run away from there? Tears of despair sprang from Victor's eyes. He shouted, "Why is it important to you? Nobody sent me anywhere. My grandma just died, and little kids shouldn't be left alone. If your parents had died, you would have gone to an orphanage too." Alberto felt offended and began shouting, "I thought you were my friend. I even let you look through my telescope, and you said such bad things." The situation took an unpleasant turn, and Margarita realized that it was time for her to intervene. She ran up to the boys, whose eyes were burning with hatred. "Boys, stop fighting." The boys looked at her with surprise and fear, but their confusion helped the widow take control of the situation. She affectionately put her arm around Victor's shoulders. "Come on, dear, let's go, we're late." Alberto was the first to snap out of his shock. "Are you from the orphanage? Will you punish Victor?" "No, nobody will punish him because we asked for leave." Victor looked at Margarita with wide eyes. The boy didn't understand what was happening. He didn't understand why this woman suddenly decided to protect him. While they exchanged glances, Alberto decided to ask a few more questions. "Victor, will you come back to our school? If you want, come to me, and we'll look at the stars together." The boy nodded. "I'll think about it." Margarita slightly nudged the boy towards the door. "Victor, it's time for us to go. Who are we going to visit with you?" The boy exhaled. "To Viola." Alberto headed towards his entrance, but halfway there, he turned around and waved. "Victor, come in." Victor understood that he was in a desperate situation. He looked at Margarita with such a gaze that it sent shivers down her spine. Once again, she caught herself thinking that this boy was the spitting image of a young Valerio. Trying to remain as calm as possible, she said, "Don't worry, I won't turn you in, even though you made the wrong choice by running away from the orphanage. We'll figure something out, but first, tell me why you were at the cemetery today." The boy stammered. "Because Valerio is my good friend. He often visited me at the orphanage and promised to take me on vacation." "Who are you?" Margarita didn't expect such a direct question. "Me? I'm Valerio's wife." The boy smiled. "He said you were very kind, and he also talked about your son, Hugo. Valerio was a very interesting person. It's a shame he died." "I feel the same. I guess I'll never get used to the idea that he's not here anymore. But since you were friends with him, I'll do everything to make sure you don't feel lonely in this world." Margarita hugged the boy, and Victor didn't resist. He felt in his heart that this woman posed no threat and that she radiated kindness. Viola Velasquez was getting ready to go to the grocery store for some shopping. She didn't like surprises, so she always bought groceries in store, and she tried to finish all the important tasks for her modest household before lunch. But as it happens, even the best laid plans can go awry. Viola found herself in such a predicament. When she started preparing a hearty dinner, she unexpectedly discovered that there was not any salt in the house. She scolded herself. "I'm such a bad homemaker, I even ran out of salt, and I missed that moment. Now I'll have to go out at night." Before she could name the destination of her unplanned trip, she heard an insistent ring at the door. The woman was confused in the middle of the hallway. Who could that be? "I'm not expecting any guests." The ringing repeated, and reluctantly, the woman went to open the door, grumbling along the way. "Maybe it's another solicitor or some junk dealers brought some rubbish to sell." She opened the door, and she couldn't hold back her emotions. "Victor? What are you doing here, you little rascal? You should be at the orphanage." Of course, Victor didn't expect such a reception, so Margarita, who was standing a little apart from the boy, had to explain everything in broad terms to the former neighbor of the child. "You see, it all came as a surprise to me personally because, until today, I had no idea about the existence of this child, but I suspect that my deceased husband was involved in his birth. Viola grabbed her head. Hold on a minute, I can't understand anything. What husband? Whose child? The hostess stepped back and said in a commanding tone, "Come into the apartment and tell me everything in detail. I'm not old enough to grasp everything on the fly anymore." The women were sitting in Viola's small but very cozy kitchen and drank coffee with cookies. Margarita's mobile phone rang a few times. Her son and friend were calling. But she replied, "Don't worry, I'll be there soon. I've got some affairs, I'll tell you everything later." When the businessman's wife introduced herself, Viola clutched her heart. "Are you Margarita Cano?" "Oh my God." The guest was taken aback. "Why does that surprise you?" The hostess didn't answer immediately. "It surprises me because one is making a mess, and the other, meaning me, has to clean it up. Come in, I'll tell you everything in order." "I guess you're blaming your late husband." Viola rolled her eyes and crossed herself. "May he rest in peace. They say he was a good man and helped orphan children." Margarita confirmed this fact. Yes, he considered charity the main thing in his life and donated a lot of his personal funds to these purposes. But as it turned out, not all the underprivileged were, if I may put it this way, equal to my husband. Viola waved her hand. "Marga, can I just call you that?" The widow forced a smile. "Of course, you can. After all, you're of the age of my mother." Getting to know her advantage, the hostess continued. "Not everything is as it seems at first glance. You suspected your husband of infidelity, but in reality, it's a completely different story. Susana Garcia, Victor's grandmother, told me everything shortly before her death. It weighed heavily on her that she once broke up a family and took another woman's husband and father. But as they say, no joy can come from causing grief. That's what happened to Susana. Her husband died of a stroke when he was barely 40. Then God took Elisa, their only daughter, and last year Susana herself left this world." Margarita was stunned. "So you mean to say that my husband and this Elisa?" Viola smirked. "Yes, they are half-siblings, and judging by how surprised you were by my story, your late husband either didn't know he had a sister or didn't want to involve you in his family history. That seems to be the case. Although it's hard for me to believe that in such a small town, people could live side by side and not know each other. Anything is possible. Perhaps your mother-in-law was a proud woman and permanently cut his father out of his life. Or maybe Valerio himself was deeply hurt by his parent and didn't want anything to do with him." Margarita nodded. "That's possible." Viola glanced thoughtfully out the window. "You know, Marga, this sin tormented Susana until her last day. She often went to church, seeking forgiveness. I don't know if the Lord forgave her, but she was punished fully and died prematurely. She didn't even make it to 60. She was very afraid that heavenly punishment would also affect Victor. She loved him very much." Margarita covered Viola's sturdy hand with her own. "I will do everything possible for this child. You know, my husband often tried to involve me in his affairs, but I always refused. Now that I know everything, I understand that I simply must continue his work." Margarita could no longer hold back her tears. She was crying on Viola's shoulder. The kind woman stroked her hair, bound in a mourning band, gently saying, "Cry, my dear, and heal your soul. It's good that you've realized your purpose. I see that you have a very kind heart." It was already night when the women parted ways. Earlier, when they had just arrived at Viola's apartment, Margarita called the director of the orphanage. "Marina, Victor Garcia is with me. Don't worry, he's fine. I'll bring him back to the orphanage tomorrow morning." The director of the orphanage thanked her. "Margarita, you have no idea what a weight you've lifted off my shoulders. We're all in chaos here. I've even started interrogating the livelier kids, but they keep silent. So thank you again. Tomorrow, this little runaway will get his due." Though Margarita understood that the orphanage director was only threatening to punish the boy verbally and actually cared deeply for each ward, she still asked, just in case. "Marina, I sincerely ask you not to put any pressure on Victor." The director proposed. "Let's talk about everything tomorrow." "I agree." Margarita left Victor with Viola and went home, where her son awaited her. Despite the situation not being entirely suitable for candid conversations, Margarita said to her son, "Hugo, how do you feel about having a serious talk?" Even 1 year at the military school had changed the boy significantly. Hugo had been trying to support his mother these past few days, helping her with the funeral arrangements. Now, in response to her question, he replied calmly but firmly, "Mom, I believe that serious matters should be discussed immediately. Such conversations cannot be postponed." Margarita breathed a sigh of relief. "I agree, and I want to tell you something." She almost precisely recounted Viola Velasquez's story to her son. Of course, for purely ethical reasons, she had to omit some details. At the end of her narrative, she asked, "Hugo, now that you know everything, advise me on what to do." The teenager rubbed his forehead. Margarita noted to herself that this was something her husband used to do when he needed to make an important decision. After a brief moment of reflection, Hugo said, "Mom, we need to take Victor out of the orphanage. After all, he's our relative, and we should take care of him. You know, I'm even glad I'll have a little brother now." Margarita smiled. "I'm glad too, but I still can't get used to the idea of Victor living with us." She said the last sentence quietly, and her son didn't hear it. As if continuing the conversation, he confessed, "By the way, Mom, you won't believe it, but I also noticed that kid at the cemetery. I even thought to myself, whose kid is wandering around the graves?" When Margarita arrived the next morning to pick up Victor, the boy was initially delighted. "Viola told me you'd be taking me home. Is that true?" Margarita found herself in an awkward position. She shot a meaningful glance at the chatty woman, but Viola found an excuse to leave the uncomfortable conversation. "I think the soup has overboiled. I was going to feed Victor some homemade soup, but I didn't expect you to come for him so early." The hostess dashed into the kitchen, leaving the boy and the woman alone. Victor looked at Margarita, his eyes welling up with tears. "You're not going to leave me at the orphanage, are you?" Margarita would give anything to ensure this boy never cried again in his life. But she couldn't deceive him. "Listen, Victor, there are rules in life that cannot be broken, and we must all abide by them, including you and me. So, you need to go back to the orphanage for a little while, and then I'll come get you." The boy didn't let her finish and burst into a desperate cry. "I don't believe you. You'll take me back, and you'll never come back. Valerio promised to take me on vacation, and then he died." It was the cry of a desperate child's soul. Margarita realized that this boy no longer believed what other people said, but she knew how to convince him that adults can keep promises. For little ones, it's simple. If you promise something, you must do it. Otherwise, why promise at all? Victor was sitting on his favorite bench in the park. Though it was quite cool outside, with a fine drizzle falling, he didn't want to go into the warm building. He was watching the branches of the trees, where lonely leaves fluttered in the wind, and sadly thought to himself, "I'm all alone too. Cassiano is mad at me and doesn't want to be friends anymore, and the guys tease me, calling me a runaway." Victor didn't know that older boys were now after him, blaming him for closing off their path to the outside world because of his actions. Leaves were floating in the puddles. Victor also wanted to float away somewhere far, far away. From afar, he heard Cassiano's warlike call. "Victor, get up. Run to the main building. Marina is calling you." Victor didn't want to run, and he slowly walked to the building. As usual, he knocked on the door of the director's office first, and when he opened it, he froze in amazement. You came?" Margarita was still in mourning for her deceased husband, but there was joy on her face. She smiled and cried, "Victor, I came for you. The boy rushed into her arms, fearing that his hopes would be dashed again and that he would be left alone once more. As if to confirm that nothing bad would happen to him anymore, Margarita whispered, "Now we'll always be together." Looking into her eyes, Victor asked, "Can I call you Mom?" "Of course, you can." Marina had witnessed such a touching scene many times in her practice. But every time, she couldn't help but shed tears.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.